Because once you start answering their questions, the rest gets easier and easier for them. So you need to really just look at yourself and ask yourself how vulnerable you are to intimidation. You have to examine your personality and honestly appraise yourself. Can you stand silence with others? Would you feel the need to break the silence and say something during conversation? Do you listen carefully when someone's speaking to you? Or do you just wait for him to finish so that you can talk? Do you crave attention? Or do you prefer to be ignored? Are you suggestible? If someone says, "Look at that," do you immediately turn your head? Do you have a tendency to snap out answers to questions? Do you often feel the need to explain or justify yourself? Are you the nervous type? Do you show it by gestures and movements of your hands or body language? How good is your resistance to discomfort? Anyhow, whatever route you decide to take in this questioning process, always maintain eye contact. Don't let your eyes move in a different way when you're being grilled and when you're not. Don't give them any indication that you're nervous, afraid, and as I said earlier, don't show them any aggression, and certainly don't get emotional. Just keep a cool head. Eventually, if you give them nothing, they have to let you go. They can only hold you for a certain amount of time, whether it's 24 hours, 48 hours, or whatever it might be. Just hunker down and deal with it. They will separate you from your family. They will separate you from anyone who can give you any advice. You just have to sit it out and wait to see what happens. Now, if they have realized they've made a mistake and they've unlawfully arrested you, they may try a few little tricks to get something on you while you're in the cell so that they can justify the arrest and avoid some sort of legal action. They might try to set you up in some way, plant something on you, or get you to handle something that you had not previously touched, getting your fingerprints on it. I know these are dirty tricks, but they have been known to happen. Ultimately, when you leave, they will ask you to sign to get your items back that they took from you in the first place. But again, sign nothing else. If you do, as I said earlier, under protest and duress, threat and coercion, sign your name, by signature agent, and underneath that, write all rights reserved without prejudice. That basically negates any effective money-making activities they can instigate using any paperwork you sign. Now, if you're driving your car and you find you're being followed by a police officer, don't make any furtive or sudden moves. Police love to follow what looks like an erratic driver and try to rattle him. So stay cool and collected. Don't start rearranging your car's interior. That should have been done before you set out. You'd be best to make sure that police stay in front of you and not behind you. When it comes to being pulled over and detained while driving, there are certain conditions that you are subject to with regards to the driver's contract. For instance, you are obliged to hand over your car registration papers and your insurance details and your driver's license. That is part of the contract and you agree to it when you apply for a driver's license. So if you are pulled over, if it were me on the stop, I would get out of the vehicle, close the windows, and shut the door and lock the car and stand outside your car whilst chatting to the officer. Again, the same as a normal detention. Don't put yourself in a position where you have to follow orders. He will invariably ask you,
"Good afternoon, sir. License and registration, please."
in which case you hand over those documents. After that, you're not obliged to do a single thing.
"Would you mind if I just had a quick look around your car, sir?"
Am I obliged to let you search my vehicle, officer? If not, I'm not consenting to any searches today. Thank you very much. You do not engage in polite conversation. Just hand the papers over and let him do what he has to do. He will go and do a license check on your driver's license, and he will check your insurance details, no doubt. If you've got an infraction on your record, you have to deal with that afterwards. And I would go to thinkfreeforums.org or similar sites to figure out how you're going to deal with that particular court appearance. But essentially, as I've said, you've signed up for the contract. You are obliged to hand over those documents if you are driving a registered vehicle and you have a driver's license. Personally, I would do a little studying on what a driver's license actually is. Once he's given you back your paperwork, effectively you're free to go, unless he's found some sort of reasonable, articulable suspicion to detain you further. If he seems to be keeping you longer than usual, be on your guard. And as in my original Dealing with the Police broadcast, during any conversation with any police officer, pull out your phone and record the conversation. If the police officer tells you to turn it off, I would say, "Your objection is noted, officer. Thank you. I reserve the right to record this conversation for my records. If there is a law that prohibits me from doing so, please state it now." And when it comes to airports, the airport is one of the most vulnerable places you can go to. It's the epitome of a controlled environment. And you've voluntarily entered into the airport, and so you've given implied consent to anything that goes on in there. Nobody in there cares about your privacy or your rights. You're defenseless. You have a flight to catch and time is against you and they know it. And they will play with that if they decide to stop you. After 9/11, air travel is no longer the same deal. And so when it comes to going through a security check, personally I would do everything I could to make sure I ninjaed through there without any hassle whatsoever. Make sure you take your belt off, don't give them any reason to search you. Make sure all your coins are out of your pocket. I know it seems like common sense, but ultimately I just like to keep their hands off me as much as I can. Just do everything you can to whisper through there like a ghost. Make sure you don't bring attention to yourself unnecessarily. Also, when you're traveling internationally, you will invariably have to fill out a landing card, like this one. And what I like to do is to take 2 of them and fill them both in, exactly the same way. And what you'll find is that every now and then a customs agent will give you a suspicious look, and he'll scribble something cryptic on your card, like a little signature or a little A or a B or something like that. He'll be alerting a desk agent to give your stuff a thorough search. So what I tend to do is I pocket the card that he's made a mark on and bring out the one that is unmarked, and present that further down the line if necessary. Now, of course, I'm just scratching the surface on this topic. There is much more to learn. Now, bearing in mind that YouTube is an international entity, the terminology I'm using to describe the progression of lawful restraint may differ in the United States, and it may differ in Canada and France and whatnot, but the process is still the same. There is the contact, there is the detention, and then finally the arrest. So try not to get hung up on the words that I'm using. They're merely words used to describe the process. Go to thinkfreeforums.org, thinkfree.ca, worldfreemansociety.org, and read up on what other people's experiences are in terms of court and dealing with the police and border patrols and so on and so forth. As you may or may not know, I have been tied up over the last few months with a writing project, but that has been handed over to my scary publisher and it will be available shortly. Details are available on the AntiTerrorist website, a link to which you'll find below in the information box. Again, I would like to offer a personal thank you to Mary Elizabeth Croft and Robert Arthur Menard for making an enormous contribution to my knowledge base and to essentially waking me up. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for that opportunity, and I would encourage everyone to watch everything that Mary Elizabeth Croft writes and puts out, and everything that Robert Arthur Menard records and puts out for your entertainment and education. You'll find Robert on YouTube under Mr. Mighty, that's M-R-M-I-T-E-E, and you will find Mary's blog on spiritualeconomicsnow.net. I often get emails asking me, does this information work in Afghanistan, or does this information work in Belgium? I have no idea. You have to research it for yourself. But ultimately, unless you're living under a dictatorship, you have certain rights. And it's just really a matter of deciding whether you're free or not, and then acting on that decision. Do the study and empower yourself. Thanks for listening.